My granddaughter said to me, "Grandma, you're too old to dream." Those words hung in the air like a dish that fell and did not break, only shattered into 100 quiet pieces. Everyone else at the table looked away, half because plates needed clearing, half because nobody wanted to stir the room. But I felt the sound ricochet against something old and raw inside me. For a second, I saw myself at 12, pressing my ear against a radiator to hear a neighbor's radio. I saw the first time I learned to pinch pennies until they jingled less. I saw the nights I stayed up with the sewing machine's lullaby while my children slept, bills stacked like awkward books on the counter. The house smelled like lemon dish soap and coffee gone cold. My granddaughter's face was earnest, as if she had offered a small, embarrassing truth that needed no tendering. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply kept chewing, went to the sink, ran my fingers along the counter where water ran and turned into the same old drip that told me it would be all right. But the phrase lodged in me and grew teeth. Too old to dream, as if there were an expiration date on hope. I was not always the invisible steady hand. I grew up in a town where hands were currency, my mother's hands mending socks, my father's hands steady at the mechanic's bench, my sister's hands steady at the kitchen table. I learned early, you make sure the lights stay on, the car starts, and people can breathe easier because you did the small things no one wanted to notice. I moved away for work when I was 25, because that was how you built a life that could keep others afloat. I learned to mail money home, to call when a heater broke, to bring meals and sit quietly when the grief was sharp. I balanced paychecks with checkbooks and prayer with practicality. For 30 years, I was a fixer, the one who signed forms at midnight, who drove across town to pick up medicine, who quietly transferred money into accounts when someone ran short. I did it because I loved them. I did it because I believed family was a ledger you kept in your heart. But doing and being are not the same thing. People can rely on a thing without ever honoring what made it move. When you spend your life making sure other people have good stories, you begin to take the role of background. You are the narrator who never gets a line. In the city where I worked, I paid rent and watched seasons change outside my window. In the small town where my family lived, the seasons mattered in a different way. Neighbors waved at church potlucks, gossip bloomed behind hedges, and reputations were both currency and burden. I tried to hold both worlds, and most days I did. I thought that was what being a grandmother meant. Steady support, a warm lap, a check slid into an envelope when a tuition bill came due. I thought love was enough. Then the dinner happened. It was one of those Sunday afternoons that felt like a bruise. Warm sun outside, but a draft in the living room. My daughter had invited us over for a late lunch. My granddaughter, 11, all knees and earnest questions, was there with her best backpacked, and the conversation meandered like it does with family. Talk about school, about weather, about what we should plant this summer. At some point, the topic turned to college savings and how we all pitched in. Someone mentioned a scholarship dinner and who had helped too. I, who had for years quietly covered extended tuition costs, stood without a word when a different voice, my son-in-law's cousin perhaps, received the praise. People laughed. Someone clapped the news story down like a finished book. And then she said it, innocent and sharp. "Grandma, you're too old to dream." It landed there like a small accusation that also revealed the wider pattern. I felt older, yes. Time had left its map on my hands. But older did not mean smaller. If anything, the years had taught me how to save my breath for the things that mattered. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the sunlight cutting across the wood in clean lines. I pictured all the times I had quietly saved the day, a car fixed in the night to get someone to work, a rent check sneaked into an envelope before a landlord's notice arrived, a warranty paid so a furnace didn't die in January. I had not been thanked. I had been expected. That expectation had been disguised as normality for so long that it had become invisible, my labor erased from the story they told about themselves. A week later, scrolling through the neighborhood group on social media, because I do keep an eye on things, I saw a post. It was a bright photograph of my granddaughter at a local fundraiser, smiling into a camera, the caption thanking friends and generous contributors, and naming my daughter as the organizer. There was a lovely sentence about community support, not a single line about the months I had spent arranging contacts, about the nights I had written checks, about the van I had helped keep running so people could transport supplies. Her caption painted a picture that left me a silhouette. The word erased came to mind. It's not dramatic. Eraser is quiet, incremental, paper thin, but it leaves a hollow where recognition should sit. I felt hurt, yes, but what surprised me was how the hurt cooled into a precise, practical clarity. There is a strange kind of lucidity that arrives when you realize the story everyone else is telling won't include you. You can keep sitting in the kitchen wondering where you belong, or you can take the small, steady steps that make space for who you are. I started with paperwork. It was not dramatic. I pulled files from a box where receipts lived like old leaves. I checked titles, not to concoct some dramatic scene, but because work requires facts. I called the bank. Simple questions, straightforward answers. I asked how long a transfer had been active, where notifications went. I called the dealership about the van I had been paying toward because it felt wrong that my name was not there any longer. I sent an email to a mutual contact asking, calmly, how the record of contributions had been made. None of these were theatrical moves. They were ordinary, bureaucratic, adult things. They were me putting my affairs in order. There's a tendency to expect fireworks in moments like that, an eruption of righteous shouting, a confrontation at the town square. I wanted none of that. My actions were not about hurting them. They were about protecting myself. I wanted boundaries, not revenge. When you remove the drama, consequences have a different shape. I told myself the truth. If you have been the scaffold for someone else's story and they refuse to acknowledge it, you are allowed to step down. That means stopping automatic transfers, adjusting who pays what, reclaiming a title when paperwork shows your name. It means saying no to calls that always come when they need a favor, but never when they could offer one. It means sometimes removing your invisible labor from their resume. They noticed, not because I made a public spectacle, but because the things I had quietly managed began to wobble. The van needed a tune-up it could no longer afford. A bill I had always covered came due and went unpaid until someone had to answer for it. In a small town, logistical problems are also social problems. Neighbors notice if someone's lights go off or if a mailbox remains unopened. Gossip is a blunt instrument. It does not parse nuance. People started to ask questions. Phones buzzed. There were whisters in the grocery store, where I sometimes bought apples, glances in church that carried a soft judgment. I watched the ripple I had set unfold and felt no satisfaction, only a steady reaffirmation that boundaries had a cost, and that cost sometimes involved watching the scramble of assumptions. There was a moment, a week after I stopped the steady support, when I encountered my daughter in the town square. She had a look on her face I recognized, a mixture of surprise and something like shame. We did not stand too close. I told her quietly what I had done. I did not enumerate every cent. I told her I would be available to talk when she was ready to tell the whole truth. She cried then, a private kind of breaking, and I saw the human complexity in her. Disappointment, embarrassment, perhaps guilt. She did not dazzle into villainy. She was a woman who had made choices I could neither condone nor fix for her. I did not gloat. My resolve was not about punishing. It was about setting a new horizon for myself. Word reached beyond the family. The person who had gotten the public praise, someone who had benefited from my logistics and generosity, had to answer for some things when community members asked questions.
A few customers canceled orders at a small shop where they worked. A fundraiser I had underwritten now required a public accounting. None of this was pretty. I watched faces I had known for years contort with discomfort. And when the one who had accepted credit finally faced me, it was in a small shop between bins of handcrafted scarves and a display of locally made candles. She looked at me the way a person looks at an old friend who has become an unfamiliar stranger. We spoke in a measured voice. I did not accuse. I told the truth of what I had done and why. I said I was tired of being absent from my own story. She said she thought she had been keeping the story intact. She had assumed I preferred to be quiet. The conversation had the messy grace of honesty, both facts and feelings, not entirely reconcilable. Some people in the shop listened, some pretended not to. Rumors swelled and leaked into corners, as they do. But the exchange itself was not a spectacle. It was, if anything, a necessary airing. I stood steady and factual. That steadiness has a power that vindication never does. When the dust settled, I returned to the city. My apartment smelled faintly of lemon and lavender. I sat at my small table and exhaled in a way I had not allowed myself to in years. There is a calm after you close a door and do not reopen it. In that quiet, I thought about the phrase again, too old to dream, and how my granddaughter had said it not as cruelty, but as a child's blunt evaluation. Children speak the truth as they see it. I thought about the dreams I had shelved, quilts I meant to finish, recipes I wanted to perfect, the small things that had nothing to do with praise and everything to do with being fully myself. I realized that boundaries make room for something else, the possibility of choosing oneself. I would not call what came next daring. It felt more like permission. I decided to start a business. I know how that reads. Start a business at 70 is not a headline you see every day. But dreaming does not ask for permission from calendars. My business would not be a flashy venture. It would be small, concrete, and tender. I wanted to create something that carried names and stitches and the comfort of hands that have learned to make things last. I had spent decades mending other people's lives. Now I wanted to stitch something that belonged to me. The idea came slowly. I had always quilted, an inheritance from my mother, who taught me how to make the hems even and how to let a pattern breathe. Quilts hold memory in seams, the faded shirt sleeve, the pocket that once kept a coin, the scraps of a child's first dress. I decided to open a small online shop selling quilts and hand-sewn home goods, each piece named after a person I loved. I called it Lily and Hearth. Lily for my granddaughter, because she had been unwitting catalyst, and Hearth because it signified home, warmth, and the place where a life is made usable.
There was no business plan that would make me rich overnight. There were modest steps: clearing a corner of my apartment, finding a small table that could be my workbench, sorting fabrics into piles of color like seasons. I bought a simple camera at a local store, nothing fancy, and asked a neighbor's teenager to take a few photographs in the afternoon light. I wrote short descriptions for each item, pieces of story tucked into the listings. This quilt is made from cottons I saved from dresses and shirts I loved. This pillow took a week of evenings and remembers Sunday mornings. The listings were honest, handmade, limited, and priced for sustainability, not spectacle. The first few nights I worked until my fingers ached in a good way, the kind of aching that means muscle remembers a craft. I found an energy in the repetition: cut, stitch, press. It steadied me. I posted an announcement on a community page, careful, concise, and I asked softly for friends to share. It felt vulnerable to put my work into the world, but there was a different hope in vulnerability now, the fine kind that says I can be seen for who I choose to be. The first sale arrived like a small miracle. A woman I had once taught at the community center messaged me saying she had lost a quilt in a move and wanted something comforting. She bought one of the smaller throws. The payment arrived, not life-changing, but meaningful. She wrote back a note: "It feels like home, thank you." I kept that message in my drawer like a talisman. Opening a business at my age did not make the past problems disappear. My family's dynamics required ongoing, patient conversation. Some of them warmed to the idea of supporting me in this new chapter. Others needed time to accept that I had stepped back from the role they had come to expect. I learned to hold both things at once: the grief of being misunderstood and the pleasure of building something for myself. That balance is quieter than a dramatic ending, but steadier. People asked me why I'd chosen quilts. I told them because making things that last is my way of believing in the future. Each stitch is an argument that small acts matter. Each sale that pays my gas and a few groceries is a small reclaiming of agency. I did not set out to be a symbol of late blooming. I only wanted to prove to myself that I still had a right to a beginning. The town reacted in little ways. Some neighbors stopped by my table at the farmer's market. Yes, I sold at that market too, because I liked the texture of real people touching cloth, and asked about the story behind Lily and Hearth. Some told me, with surprising softness, that they had seen my quiet work for years and had not known how to say thank you. Others kept their distance. Old patterns are hard to rewrite. But the community also offered unexpected allies: an older man who taught me how to list items online more clearly, a woman who offered to teach me about shipping more economically, a teenager who volunteered to model a throw in front of a brick wall for better photos. I learned that asking for help is not the same as needing saving. It is the first gesture of building. I do not pretend everything is fixed. Not all conversations were tidy. There were afternoons I felt lonely, nights I worried about whether the orders would keep coming. I worried about whether my story would be misread as a pink ribbon of triumph instead of the messy, honest thing it is. I worried about what people would think when my business was not a runaway success. But these anxieties live alongside a different feeling: the quiet joy of making my hands useful for my own life. Starting Lily and Hearth taught me practical lessons and spiritual ones. By spiritual, I mean the simple sense that life yields to those who steward it with tenderness. I learned to set office hours, because freedom without structure is still just unending demand.
I learned to price my work so that it valued the time and materials I put in. I learned to take small marketing steps that felt like me, writing short notes to customers, including a sprig of lavender in packages, naming a quilt after the gardener down the street who always had tomatoes to share. My granddaughter? Our relationship shifted in ways I did not expect. She came over one afternoon and sat at my work table 5 minutes longer than a child's attention span usually allows. She traced the line of a stitch and asked, not mockingly now, but with real curiosity, "Did you make all these?" I told her about the dresses I had used, about the pockets I'd kept for memory. She looked at me differently, not with pity, but with recognition. She said, "Can I help?" And I gave her a small needle, and when she pricked her finger and frowned, I showed her how to bandage it. She laughed at herself and then at me, and in that laughter was a new tenderness. I am not here to proclaim some triumphant moral. You are never too old to start a business. I will not promise that every late beginning blooms into riches. What I will say is this: being told you're too old will sting worse than you expect, and you have every right to respond with a quiet, ordinary life recalibrated. Dreams are not a currency limited to the young. They are permissions we grant ourselves, sometimes after a long apprenticeship of doing for others. If this speaks to you, and you've ever felt invisible in your own story, consider staying to hear what happens next. People often ask for the exact moment when everything turned. There was no single instant. There were small, precise acts: a phone call to a bank, a careful email, a quilt stitched in the late hours with a radio for company. The change came as a sum of these acts.
When I stopped being the unpaid, uncredited pillar, I bought myself a different life. I did not do it to punish my family. I did it so that my energy could be spent on things that honored me. There are still hard days when emails go unanswered and when old habits pull at me like a thread, wanting to be rewoven into the same pattern. There are times when my daughter and I must sit and parse mistakes and apologies that do not fix everything. But even those conversations are different now because they occur between two adults who have had to learn consequences. She comes by sometimes with tomatoes and sometimes with confession. We are learning to hold our complicated family like a quilt with a few stains: visible, acknowledged, repairable. Lily Hearth continues to be small. I will not build an empire. I make enough to cover a few bills, to buy fabric I love, and to feel the pleasant fatigue of a day well spent. I receive notes from customers who tell me a throw warmed them through a rough night. I keep those messages like pressed leaves. They are small affirmations that the work matters beyond ledger lines. The town still murmurs. People still remember me as the one who always fixed things. But some of those same voices now call me that woman with the quilts, and say it like it is a new kind of respect. That shift pleased me less than the fact that I can now tell my granddaughter bedtime stories about small businesses and stubborn hearts. I want her to know that dream is a verb, not a demographic. If you were told once, by a child, by a neighbor, by an offhand remark, that you are too old for something, let that sting become a doorway. You do not need fireworks to cross it. A table, a plan, a small supply of patience, and several carefully chosen fabrics will do. I am still learning how to balance tending and ending, how to give without losing myself. But I have reclaimed the simple dignity of being a protagonist in my own life. The line my granddaughter said to me sits now like a question I answered. Yes, I am older, and yes, I am still allowed to dream. If you want to see how Lily Hearth grows, slow, honest, stitch by stitch, follow along. I'll share the small victories, the mistakes, and the things that make my hands smile. A new pattern, a late night finish, the first time a quilt leaves the doorstep of someone who needs one. For anyone who has been told they're too old to dream, consider this your invitation. Keep making. Keep choosing yourself. Keep stitching.